Hi guys, we're at the old shop today and it's new tool day, so let's go check it out. Okay, well there it is. We decided if we're going to be sawing lumber, at some point we're going to want to make some boards, and this is the machine to do it. We can level things out to whatever thickness that we want. The machine itself was in really good condition. I've just used 600 grit and got most of the surface rust off of the columns and the bed on it. Cleaned up the cutter head here, and it's pretty good, no pitting or anything like that on it. The knife blades in it did have a few nicks, so I'll show you how I've been getting rid of that. But my biggest obstacle so far is I don't know how to what height to set the blades, because these used a setting jig that you pressed on top of the roller, and the blades are spring loaded so they pop up, so all you had to do is set that on there, and that will get your height set. But lacking that, I'm gonna have to come up with something different, and I think I've got a good solution for that. I was watching videos on setting planer blade height and came across a tool that looked like this. I cut this out of a piece of aluminum and bored a 3/8 hole through the top of it for the stem of my dial indicator, and I put a set screw and stuck a piece of plastic down inside the hole, so when I tighten up this screw I don't put a mark on my indicator. But at any rate, this thing here just fits inside here, so I can see where a lot of other tools might not work so well. But this lets me set this up on the base of the circle, and then I can turn the blade up underneath of it and get a height adjustment. And you can see that's kind of a tight fit in there. And then because of the arrangement of this motor, it's tilted out of the way, but even at that, it's kind of a tight fit getting that in there. You can't get past this bolt without swinging it around. But in any case, I did run it across the blades and found there was probably a 5 to 10 thousandths of difference from one side to the other of the blade, which means they're not set right. But they look like original blades, and I don't see a lot of stuff on this machine that really indicates too much been messed with on it. So right now the plan is just to kind of clean it up, get it set kind of where it belongs, and then we'll haul it out to the mountain and put it to use eventually. But right now it was just one of those things that was too good to pass up on, so I went ahead and got it, and we'll see if we can get it put back together. Okay, so here's the setup I'm using. I got a dial indicator stand. I used to be a machinist, so I have a few tools like this. Had it said a little better earlier, but you can kind of get the idea of what I'm doing here. The rollers for the in feed and out feed of this machine are supposed to be 40 thousandths of an inch lower than the cutter head or the blades. So just the fact that it doesn't look like the machine's been disturbed too much, I think I can go by those measurements on the outfeed roller back in here. So I got the measurement from that. I found out that the cutter head itself was a 1/10 of an inch higher than that roller, so it's 0.1. And then after setting the indicator up on the cutter head and measuring what the existing blade height was, it looks like it's somewhere between 15 18 thousandths of an inch, which puts it at about a 3 millimeter mark, which I read in a forum somewhere was possibly the height of the blade. And according to where the bevels are on the back of the blade, intersecting the cutter head, it looks like maybe that's probably the right place for it to be. So I think I'm going to go ahead and set it that way, and using that tool that I showed you previously, be able to set a height for that, and then set the blades in there and make sure they're accurate. Okay, this is the blade right up here, and then this is the cutter head, and you can kind of see the relationship, this little bit of reveal along the back of the blade. So I've zeroed this dial indicator on the cutting head. And then when I set the you can see it's zeroed and on the 6 right now. So when I bring it up, I did see a video on YouTube involving the setting of blades. I don't recall that, but it'd be easy enough to search for that. The guy made a wooden base instead of this aluminum one here. Basically 2 pieces of wood that he cut out with a jigsaw and then clamped together with some bolts around a cheap indicator, and that seemed to work for him. I saw this particular version on eBay for $500, so I thought, you know what, for half hour of my time I can make my own, so that's what I went with. Okay, so I zeroed out this indicator tool that I made on one end of the blade here just to get kind of a reference, assuming that whoever put it in there had done so with a gauge at one point. I don't even know if these blades have been disturbed or not, but when I move the tool down to the other end of the blade, there's the peak of it, and there's a good 0.008 difference between one side of the blade and the other. So this may have been doing some kind of wacky cuts and you know, left marks on the boards, and it probably upset the user. So it could possibly be that they just never used it that much, or that the blades got knocked out of whack. There's some pretty rough chips in it, and the blades have some nicks in them, so somebody ran something through it one time that was a little hard on the blades. But at any rate, we'll get it set back up so that it is in a proper place. Okay, I'm getting my blade height set by the zeroed gauge here, and it's set right on top of this blade. And I did sharpen this blade, so it is pretty sharp. And these cap screws that go into this wedge, you essentially loosen them up so it tightens against the cutter head and it pushes the blade into the cutter head at the same time. That's what locks things into place. The blades have springs under them, so they want to be pushed up, so it takes a little juggling between pushing that down and adjusting these screws, but we'll go ahead and get that locked in there. There's a bunch of crud stuck in there pretty hard. This machine had a lot of the packing grease still on it. I don't think this is packing grease, maybe this is just some sap, but it's really stuck on there. At any rate, we're going to pull this blade out. There was a wrench wired onto the machine. It's been ground on one side, so I'm assuming that's probably the original wrench. It's 13 millimeter on one end and 10 millimeter on the other. Tighten them a little bit at a time, and that actually has the effect of loosening them because they're pushing against the back of this cutter head. And there the knife is popped up. There is a couple little springs about the size of ballpoint pen springs, maybe just a little bit bigger, that push the blade up. And that's the blade. They're 1 inch wide. They're supposed to have a 35-degree bevel cut on them. And this one's had a little bit of a rough time through this area right here. There's one pretty good sized nick there, and then a couple littler ones here. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that blade up, get the crud off of it, and we'll get this wedge out of here and clean that up too, and make sure there's no more debris down inside of that mounting slot. The blades on this planer are 13 1/8 inches long, and I don't usually sharpen anything that big, at least lengthwise. So I made this jig, and I've got a pin in 2 places here for the blade to stop against, and then I made these clamps out of a piece of cut off angle iron, so that it's got a step on the back, and then screw goes into it. Goes into a threaded hole on my sharpening jig, and then that'll clamp the blade in place. So it's basically a hinge assembly. I just have this back piece notched out, and the screw's got a point on it that just goes into the bottom plate where the blade's going to mount, and tighten those up, and it sets an angle across here, and you'll see how that's used, but that allows me to adjust so that I can evenly run a hone across the blade. Did a quick check with some digital calipers here, and I'm getting like 1 inch and 10/1000ths of an inch on both ends, but when I go out in the middle here, it's down to like 1 inch and 7/1000ths of an inch, or maybe just a little bit less. So there's a bit of wear through the middle of the blades, but not so much on the outside. Anyway, you always hear about people counting their strokes on something to keep track of how much metal they're removing. I don't think that's going to work so good on a blade this long, so I just measure it, and then I know how much I'm taking off, and when the blade gets to be straight, I've checked it against a straight edge every once in a while, hold it up to the light, and you can see if it's getting straight. Really, for the surface of wood, I don't imagine that 3/1000ths of an inch or so is going to be really that big of an issue. So let's push the blade up so it's against these pins that I put in here. I'd considered using eccentrics for those 2 spots there, because then I could slide the blade out evenly on one end or the other if it's not getting the exact angle on it. But so far it seems to have worked on the other blade that I just sharpened. I use a Sharpie. Sometimes I've used die-cam since I do machine work, but don't have any of that right now that's any good. So if you just use the Sharpie on here, you can mark the edge of the blade, and then when we go to hone it, you can see right where the hone's starting at, and you can even some degree kind of gauge how much metal you're taking off with it if you measure things and then check what you get. It just starts to fade away. You can usually figure about 2/10,000ths of an inch is coming off. using diamond hones because they stay flat, but I didn't have a coarse stone, and I got this one, and to be honest with you, it's pretty awful, but it's saving me some grinding time. I'm putting a piece of packing tape on the edge of the hone here on one end, just so it doesn't grind there anymore, and then that way when I put this to the blade, the tape rubs on this backstop part here that sets the angle, so it doesn't wear on there, doesn't change the angle over time. Nice thing about this jig is you can hold it any which way that you want, so that you can get whatever works for you, or it could be mounted down to a bench, but as I continue to grind on it, it'll take off more of the marker, and you can see it doesn't take very long for it to start showing what you're accomplishing. But I'm not sure what they ground these blades with, but it looks like maybe 220 grit, because they are pretty rough, and there's a lot of bumpy metal in there through the back part of it. I don't know how they got the edges of them ever to be sharp, but we'll see if we can get some of these nicks out of here and this worn edge out. I'll spend more time on these outside edges here, and see if I can remove more metal from those and kind of flatten the blade out. But you can see the jig's doing a good job of holding the angle on there, and it's cutting more towards the outside edge, but it is getting back into here and taking out the old grinder marks from the original manufacture of the blade. So just have to keep working it out until I get it down to where I have an edge back on this again. Well, that's a little better. Now I'll go put it back together. So I use the wrench just to put a little bit of tension on the blade, and then I'm able to push the blade down, and I'm tapping on it with the end of this hammer handle. You could use a dowel or other piece of wood, piece of plastic. If I go down too far, I can loosen it up, and I can use a machinist pick hook to grab a hold of the end of the blade, because they stick out a little bit past the cutter head, and you're able to pull them up a little bit. So eventually working back and forth and settle the blade to where it's pretty level, but this blade does have a little bit of a belly in it, so it's not exactly perfect, but I'll get back to sharpening it up sometime, and should be pretty decent. Okay, adjusted the table rollers, but this one here is kind of sticky, so I need to figure out how to get it removed. There was wood jammed in it before, so I don't know if something got injured there or not. Put all the covers back on it. There's a cover here, there's a wood dust shield in there. Adjusted the belt tension, so should be kind of ready to go. Never run it before, so get these wires prepped and put a plug on the end of this cord. This is eventually going to have a different plug on it. I'm just using this one because got a lot of weird outlets in this shop from all the different equipment that have been run in different places, and I just need to adapt to one of the plugs. So I'll just make up a deal that goes to an extension cord and gets me over to an outlet, and then eventually I'll use that plug that I have for an adapter that'll end up going on this machine, and then that'll be able to go directly into our generator out in the mountain. Well, it's all wired up, and no smoke came out of anything, so see if this thing does anything. Got a piece of pine here. Not sure about the adjustments on this yet, but I guess we'll find out. See if it throws a board across the room. good. There is some little bit of marking in the wood here where you can tell that the blades aren't particularly sharp, and I'm not sure why I was getting the infeed roller marks when I put it through here, but they came out on this side, so I guess the depth of cut wasn't enough to get rid of the roller marks, but it looks like it's working. So I got to put the height gauge back on it that I removed. Double-sided tape was loose on that, and otherwise that's pretty much everything back together. So I think we can get this thing hauled out to the mountain, and eventually we'll put it to work.